Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We're in Joshua chapter 22. My intentions is to finish the book of Joshua today. This is the closing, you can say the closing out of this generation, the Joshua generation. They have completed, Joshua, you can say, has completed his mission. One, he has brought the Israelites across the Jordan. He has conquered the land, and now he has divided the land. So really, Israel is a full-fledged sovereign nation at this point. And we'll get to the kingship later. But they are a theocracy for sure, under the rulership and protection of God. Get to that later as well. But what you see is that Joshua has completed the land, and so he's going to just tidy up some things, and this generation is going to close out by the end of the book. Let's get to it. Joshua chapter 22. Joshua summoned the Reubenites, Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, and told them, "You have done everything Moses, the Lord, the servant, commanded you, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded you." Now, if you remember, before they crossed the Jordan, the Reubenites, Gadites, and half of the tribe of Manasseh said, hey, they stayed on the other side of the land. They said this is a good land. There were some good cities they conquered. So they really just, and there were some hard feelings at first, but then, because Moses had basically said, hey, you don't want to go in the land that God is promising you, and didn't we have this problem 40 years ago? But then they said, look, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Our fighting men will cross the Jordan with you, and they will fight with you until you have conquered the land. They said, okay, that sounds good. So this has been about a 5-year journey, and they have completed it. The land has been conquered and divided, and now Joshua is releasing them, and they're going to return to the other side and then live out their lives. And this is where we're at. Verse 3, you have not deserted your brothers even once this whole time, but have carried out the requirements of the command of the Lord your God. Now that he's given your brothers rest, just as he's promised them, return to your homes in your own land that Moses, the Lord's servant, gave you across the Jordan. Only carefully obey the commands, instructions that Moses, the Lord's servant, gave you. To love the Lord your God, walk in his ways, keep his command, remain faithful to him, and serve him with all of your heart and all of your soul. Okay. Keep this in mind. Verse 5 here, it's really the essence of the law, which is to love God, walk in his ways, and be faithful to him. Verse 6, Joshua blessed them and sent them on their way, and they went to their homes. Moses had given territory to half tribe of Manasseh in Bashan, but Joshua had given territory to the other half with his brothers on the west side of the Jordan. When Joshua sent them to their homes and blessed them, he said, return to your homes with great wealth, a huge number of cattle and silver, gold, bronze, iron, and a large quantity of clothing. Share the spoils of your enemies with your brothers. All right, so they left, and they were, let me kind of give you just a quick picture with our hefty map here. Now, when they talk about the east side, look at the picture, the large picture there. So you see the Jordan River. So if you look at the two seas, the Dead Sea, and then you see the Sea of Galilee. So when they had came up, remember they came, the side that they are returning to is the side where it says East Manasseh, and then you see Reuben, and then you see Gad right there. So so they're going to travel one or two ways, probably. Who knows how they had to kind of go back over down towards around the Dead Sea. But this is now they're going to go to this other side and live on this other side right here. So even though what is separating them basically is two great seas, the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, and then of course the River of Jordan, as you see how it goes from the Dead Sea to the Sea of Galilee. All right, verse 13. Verse 9, the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites at Shiloh, in the land of Canaan to return to their own land in Gilead, which they took possession according to the Lord's command through Moses. When they came to the region of the Jordan, the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh built a large, impressive altar there by the Jordan. Now, this was a big concern. Verse 11: the Israelites heard it and said, "Look, the Reubenites, Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan, out at the region of the Jordan, on the Israelite side." When the Israelites heard this, the entire Israelite community assembled at Shiloh to go to war against them. Now, this is going to be interesting here because, again, what this to me shows is this generation and their faithfulness and how diligent they were to keep the commands of the Lord. Verse 13, the Israelites sent Phinehas and Eleazar the priest to the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh to the land of Gilead. They sent 10 leaders with them, one family leader from each tribe of Israel. All of them were heads of their families among with the clans of Israel. They went to the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead and told them, "This is what the Lord's entire community says. What is this treachery you have committed today against the God of Israel by turning away from the Lord and building an altar for yourselves, so that you are in rebellion against the Lord this day? Was it the sin of Peor which brought a plague on the Lord's community enough for us, so that we have not cleansed ourselves from it even to this day? And now you would turn away from the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow he would be angry with this entire community of Israel. But if the land you possess is defiled, cross over to the land and possess where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and take possession of it among us. But don't rebel against the Lord or against us by building yourself an altar other than the altar of the Lord your God." Wasn't Achan, son of Zerah, unfaithful regarding what was set apart for destruction, bringing wrath on the entire community of Israel? He was not the only one of the priests. He was not the only one who perished because of his sin. So now they really kind of bringing this to them, like, are you going to sin? We're not going to allow you to sin right here, okay? And of course, if what is true what they're saying, there's only one altar, only one place of worship. So the question is, why are you building this altar? Even if they were building this altar to serve the Lord, it still was in rebellion. They weren't supposed to do it. Verse 21. The Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh answered the leaders of the Israelite clan, "Yahweh is God of gods. Yahweh is the God of gods. Yahweh is the God of gods. He knows, and may Israel also know. Do not spare us today if it was in rebellion or treachery against the Lord that we have built for ourselves an altar to turn away from him. May the Lord himself hold us accountable if we intend to offer burnt offerings and grain offerings to it, or to sacrifice fellow offerings on it." Now they're already saying this is not why we built this altar. Verse 24, "We actually did this from a specific concern that in the future your descendants might say to our descendants, 'What relationship do you have with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a border between us and you and your descendants, Reuben and Gad. You have no share in the Lord, so your descendants may cause our descendants to stop fearing the Lord. Now, this is why they're building this. Although they would have had the law, they would have had the commandments of Moses on record, okay, to say, no, that's not true. Verse 26. Therefore we said, let us take action and build an altar for ourselves, but not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. Instead, it is to be a witness between us and you, and between our generations after us, so that we may carry out the worship of the Lord in his presence with our burnt offering, sacrifice, and fellowship offering. Then, in the future, your descendants will not be able to say to our descendants, you have no share in the Lord. Now, again, even though this is it's going to clear it up, this never would have happened. One, God would have, had they stayed faithful, God would have intervened, but they also had the words of Moses. All right, verse 28. We thought that if they said this to our generations in the future, we would reply, look at the replica of the Lord's altar that our fathers made, not for burnt offerings or sacrifice, but as a witness between us and you. We would never rebel against the Lord or turn away from him today by building an altar for burnt offerings, grain offerings, and sacrifice other than the altar of the Lord our God, which is in the front of his tabernacle. Now, again, this is harmless. In one respect, they didn't need to do this, but it was harmless, and that's the whole point. In other words, this is not an altar where worship will happen. That's their point, which would have been a grave error. Verse 30, when Phinehas and the priests and the community leaders, the heads of Israel's clans who were with him, heard what descendants of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh had to say, they were pleased. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, and the priest said to the descendants of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is among us, because you have not committed this treachery against him. As a result, you have delivered the Israelites from the Lord's power. Then Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, and the leaders returned from the Reubenites and the Gadites in the land of Gilead to the Israelites in the land of Canaan, and brought back a report to them. Then the Israelites were pleased with this report, and they praised God, and they spoke no more about going to war against them to ravage the land where the Reubenites and Gadites lived. So the Reubenites and Gadites named the altar, it is a witness between us and the Lord. Now, when we get into the book of Judges, we will see where the Israelites will actually go to war over a horrible, wicked incident. But they were at least able to say, hey, this one we don't have to go to war over. Chapter 23. This is Joshua's farewell address. Verse 23. A long time after the Lord had given Israel rest from all of the enemies all around, Joshua was old, getting on in years. So Joshua summoned all of Israel, including its elders, leaders, judges, and officers, and said to them, I am old, getting on in years. And as you have seen for yourself everything the Lord your God did to all the nations on your account, because it was the Lord your God who was fighting for you. Now again, I want you to remember this, file this statement right here. The Lord was fighting for you. Because we can see this when we further down, when we get into the book of the writings of the prophets. Verse 4. See, I have allotted these remaining nations to you as an inheritance for your tribes, including all the nations I have destroyed, from the Jordan westwards to the Mediterranean Sea. The Lord your God will force them back on your account and drive them out before you, so that you can take possession of their land, as the Lord your God has promised you. Be strong and continue obeying all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you do not turn from the right or the left, so that you do not associate with these nations remaining among you. Do not call on the name of their gods or make an oath to them. Do not worship or bow down to them. Instead, remain faithful to the Lord your God, as you have done to this day. The Lord has driven out great and powerful nations before you, and no one is able to stand against you, you this day. One of you rout 1,000, because the Lord your God was fighting for you as he's promised. So be very diligent to love the Lord your God for your well-being. For if you turn away and cling to the rest of these nations remaining among you, and if you intermarry or associate with them, and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will continue to drive out these nations before you, and they will become a snare and a trap for you, a scourge for your sides and thorns in your eyes, until you disappear from the good land the Lord your God is giving you. Now, you should know what he is when he talks about not marrying. The reason why he is saying do not intermarry with them is not because of race, not even culture, even though the culture plays in it, but it's their wickedness. The reason why I say that is because a foreigner could marry if they, what we call, embrace the God of Israel. Ruth being a prime example of that. Verse 14, I am now going the way of all the earth, and you know with all of your heart and with all of your soul that none of the good promises the Lord your God has made to us has failed. Everything was fulfilled for you. That one promise has failed, since every good thing the Lord your God promised has come about. So he will bring on you every bad thing until he has annihilated you from the good land the Lord your God has given you. Now, unfortunately, this will come to pass. If you break the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and worship other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly disappear from the good land he has given you. Now, as I said, sadly, this will come to pass, because after this generation, they will quickly fall away. All right, chapter 24, verse 1. Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem, and summoned Israel, elders, leaders, judges, and officers, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates rivers and worshiped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the region beyond the Euphrates river and led him throughout the land of Canaan and multiplied his descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I gave the hill country of Seir to Esau as a possession, but Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron. I plagued Egypt by what I did there, and afterwards I brought you out. When I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you reached the Red Sea, and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen as far as the sea, your fathers cried out to the Lord, so he put darkness between you and the Egyptians and brought the sea over them, engulfing them. Your own eyes saw what I did to Egypt. After that, you lived in the wilderness a long time. Now, when he says some of them, remember, keep this in mind, the youngest of them would have been around 60 at this time, 60 plus, okay, 65, depending on how much time has passed since Moses had finished dividing the land, and then the Gadites and Reubenites and half the tribe of Manasseh went over to the other side of Israel. But 5 years plus. All right, verse 8. Later I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived beyond the Jordan. They fought against you, but I handed them over to you. You possessed their land, and I annihilated them before you. Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, set out to fight against Israel. He sent for Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you, but I would not listen to Balaam. Instead, he repeatedly blessed you, and I delivered you from his hand. You then crossed the Jordan. It says, you then crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The people of Jericho, as well as the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Gigazites, Hivites, and Jebusites fought against you, but I handed them over to you. I sent a hornet ahead of you and drove out the two Amorite kings before you. It was not by your sword or bow I gave you a land you did not labor for, and cities you did not build. Though you live in them, you are eating from the vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Therefore, fear the Lord and worship Him sincerely, in sincerity and truth. Get rid of the gods of your father. Get rid of the gods your father worshipped beyond the Euphrates rivers and in Egypt, and worship Yahweh. But if it does not please you to worship Yahweh, choose for yourselves today the one you will worship: the God of your fathers worship beyond the Euphrates rivers, or the God of the Amorites, in whom land you are living. As for me and my family, we will worship Yahweh. So you see this famous phrase, people quote this all the time, that Joshua said, as for me and my family, we will worship Yahweh. Now, the contrast was that there was paganism all around Israel. And that's the sad thing, that they will fall into that. Verse 16. The people replied, we will certainly not abandon the Lord or worship other gods. For the Lord our God brought us and our fathers out of the land of Egypt in the place of slavery, and performed these great signs before our eyes. He also protected us all along the way we went among all the peoples whose land we traveled through. The Lord drove out before us all the people, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too worship the Lord, because He is our God. Verse 19, but Joshua told the people, you will not be able to worship Yahweh, because He is holy. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God, and He will not remove your transgressions and sins. If you abandon the Lord and worship foreign gods, He will turn against you, harm you, and completely destroy you, after He has been good to you. Verse 21, no, the people answered Joshua, we will worship the Lord. Verse 22, then Joshua told the people, you are witness against yourself, that you yourselves have chosen to worship the Lord. We are witness, they said. Then get rid of the foreign gods that are among you, and offer your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. Now, this is kind of amazing here, that He's telling them 45 plus years after they have came out of Egypt, to get rid of the foreign gods. In other words, these little statues, right? The pagan symbols. He said, get rid of them. Now, and I also say this because sometimes we're not going to always have this detail when God judges Israel and the plague breaks out or they're conquered. But oftentimes, you notice, here you have Joshua telling the people to get rid of their gods 45 plus years after they came out. And this is something that Israel will wrestle with until the Babylonian Empire. And we're going to see this as we get into the book of Judges, that they will repeatedly, fall into pagan worship. Verse 24, so the people said to Joshua, we will worship the Lord our God and obey Him. On that day, Joshua made a covenant with the people at Shechem and established a statute and ordinance for them. Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. He also took a large stone and set it up there under the oak next to the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said to all the people, you see this stone, it will be a witness against us, for it has heard all the words the Lord said to us, and it will be a witness against you, so that you will not deny your God. Then Joshua sent the people away, each of his own inheritance. Now it says, now after these things, the Lord's servant Joshua son of Nun died at the age of 110. They buried him in the allotted territory at Timnath Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Israel Yahweh throughout Joshua's lifetime and during the lifetime of the elders who outlived Joshua and who had experienced all of the works that Joshua had done for Israel. Now, a couple of things that, again, that's important to kind of remember here, that as we overlap into the book of Judges next time, you remember that when Israel came out, Joshua was about, I'm going to guess, around 60 years old, about 20 years younger than Moses. Okay, so when you think about that, he was about 60 years old. So, and so you add 40 years old, 40 years when they went into the wilderness. He would have been around 100, and he added another 5 years, if I'm correct with my math here. He would have been about 105 when he completed bringing the people into Israel. Now, about another 5 years before his death. You go back, that the youngest person who would have survived at the time that God pronounced Israel. So you had Israel who said, God said to Israel, about a year after they came out, that everyone from 20 years old and older would perish. Everyone from 20 years old and younger survived. So the elders that kind of was around when they saw that that Joshua was referring to would have been around 60 to 40 years, 70 years old now. Now, that's, of course, not counting all of the children for the next 40 years that were actually born during the wilderness time. So as Joshua now is dying, these people here, he is saying that another, let's say, 10 to 15 years, that they are the ones as we're going to fade out, and then it gets a lot worse for Israel. Verse 32 says, Joseph's bones, which Israel had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem, in the parcel of land Jacob purchased for his sons, Hamor, Shechem 400 quasit. It was an inheritance for Jacob's descendants. And it says, and Eleazar, son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah, which he had given his sons, Phinehas, in the hill country of Ephraim. All right, so this ends the book of Joshua. I often think that even though the first 5 books of Moses is considered the law, I think Joshua should be compared to that. Okay. But the Joshua generation, and I can see why it's separate in that it is the Joshua generation. So the generation after Moses. Okay. So you can kind of say the Mosaic generation. Moses is sort of Joshua is sort of the last one, surviving one, that generation. So as we now get into the book of Judges, it's a different section of the historic part, and it gets bad from there. All right, guys, the book of Judges in the next study. I will see you then.